The following is by R Orage. How not to be bored. Nothing is more common than the complaint that one's neighbours are uninteresting, boring. Such complaints, however, are unconscious confessions rather than accusations, since the truth is that we are bored or uninterested exactly at the limit of our active intelligence. Boredom begins where our mind leaves off, and to be easily or quickly bored merely means that our intelligence is either small or very idle. All people without exception are interesting and worthwhile. Not only is there nothing else for us to know than people, the educational purpose of life being just to acquaint us with the mystery of mankind, but every individual is, as it were, an epitome of the whole human book. Who can read and understand everything about one person, has the key to the knowledge of the race. Thus one person is as good as another as a subject of interest, and to be bored by anybody is to fail to look for interest in him. This is not to say that there are not people who, in relation to ourselves, create interest, and others who do not. We can, in fact, divide all the people we know into two classes. Those who, without effort on our part, interest and stimulate us, really interesting people, as we say, with whom it is always a pleasure to associate, and those who, in and of themselves, arouse and stimulate no interest and no pleasure at all, the uninteresting and dull people. But since, as we know very well, the same people are neither interesting to everybody nor uninteresting to everybody, it cannot be the case that they are the one or the other absolutely. They are only interesting, or the reverse for us. Why is this so? Is it possible for us to make people interesting who are not naturally so? Let us realize that in essence we are each of us composed of a collection of chemicals, using chemicals as a word for any particular kind of matter. As between one individual and another, not only is there a difference in the number of component chemicals, but the chemicals are not all the same, nor in the same proportions, nor in the same state of activity. This fact illustrates and explains the extraordinary variety in people. No two are chemically compounded exactly alike. And since we are or can manifest only what our component chemicals allow us to be or to appear, each of us may be said to be defined by the chemicals of which we are composed. Now we know that certain chemicals are related to others by what we call affinity. They take notice of some, but they are indifferent to others. With some they will enter into active relations, exchanging qualities or actually combining. With others they remain inert. It is all the same whether such chemicals are in a laboratory or in a human body. Their qualities and action are the same. And thus it follows that what we call our interest in people, or their interest in us, arises from or is conditioned by the presence in us and in them of actively related chemicals. All our relations with people, friendly, indifferent, or hostile, are, at bottom, determined by the relations of the chemicals of which we and they are composed. Nevertheless, there is a difference, and a very important one, between a laboratory containing chemicals and a human being containing the same chemicals. In the latter laboratory there is a chemist. The chemicals in two neighbouring laboratories will mix and combine according to their qualities. They would act and react on each other naturally. But if there be a chemist in one of them, or better still a chemist in each of them, and if the chemists in both are thoroughly conversant with the laws of chemistry, then in place of the combinations due simply to nature and circumstances, we should have a series of combinations due to science and art, combinations improbable or impossible in ordinary circumstances. Returning to human relations, the analogy should be clear. So long as a man simply follows his interests, that is to say, finds people interesting or boring and acts accordingly, seeking the company of the first and avoiding the company of the second, so long as he's just a laboratory without a chemist. He does nothing. He simply allows his chemicals to manifest their native qualities of affinity, indifference or hostility, without attempting by science or art to rearrange them to enable them to enter into more and more varied relation with the chemicals in his neighbours' laboratories. He is, as we say, a creature of circumstance, and it is all a matter of chance whether he finds people dull or stimulating, or is himself, to other people, one or the other. To put a chemist into our laboratory and to train him to work scientifically is the chief object of psychology. We wish to be masters of ourselves and to have control over all the elements of which we are made. We wish to be able to enjoy all our resources and to combine them with elements outside ourselves and in other people exactly as we please. Each of us really desires this power over himself. It is the essential aim and function of man. But what is this but precisely to put a chemist into our natural laboratory and to set him to work? As it is, and simply following the line of least resistance, we are not chemists with laboratories, but laboratories without chemists, or, let us say, laboratories in which the chemists are asleep. We must wake up the chemist in ourselves. The means are comparatively simple. First, we must give our idle chemist a motive or reason for bestirring himself, and second, we must tell him how to begin to work. There are abundant reasons, and among them these. We are always at the mercy of people and circumstances, so long as we depend on people and circumstances to interest us of themselves. We shall never know ourselves and others more than accidentally and imperfectly, so long as we remain simply laboratories. We shall live and die passive and mechanical agents of processes we do not understand, so long as we do not try to make combinations which are just not easy and natural. If we continue to act simply according to our natural affinities, our likes and dislikes, we shall be no more than mineral or vegetable or animal men. We shall never be human men. How to begin? Make every encounter with people a laboratory experiment in psychology. Say to yourself in the presence of another person or persons, "Here is a wonderful collection of chemicals of which I know only a tiny number. I wish to know and understand them all. That is my work as a human being." In this attitude of active curiosity, it is impossible to be bored by anybody in any circumstances. Your interest in people, circumstances, and the like is in yourself as a constant and increasing energy. You live ever more abundantly. Something of this kind of alchemistry must have been implied in the promise made to the Christian disciples. "I have come that ye might have life, and have it more abundantly." How to read men. People are the most interesting books in the world. Books themselves interest us only because they are about people, their actions, their words, their feelings, and their thoughts. If we could read people as easily as we can read books about people, who would take the trouble to read books with the subjects of all books before him? Our only excuse for reading books about people is that we cannot read people themselves. Over a long life, and after having seen many people in many circumstances, a man may attain a degree of efficiency in reading a human book. Such men, indeed, seldom read printed books unless they are just amusing. They have acquired the taste for reading books bound in flesh and blood. Their skill, nevertheless, is exceedingly limited if we judge by the text to be read. Every man is not only a book, but a scripture. Some parts of the text are comparatively easy to read. All of us have naturally some notion of what people are. Other parts are a little more difficult, and long experience and practice in reading people are necessary to enable us to read these passages correctly. But for the very reason that every man is made in the image of God, and is a pocket world in himself, it is certain that the reading of man by even the most experienced social leaders is limited to only a small fraction of the complete text. It is as if a child knowing only English were to read in a book printed in all the languages of the world. Partly with a view to supplementing our ordinary means of reading men, including ourselves, attempts of a more or less honest character have been made to discover and read new alphabets. Ordinarily, we depend upon the evidence of our senses and actual experiences, but since this is not satisfactory, we turn to strange scripts and other devices. Palmistry and phrenology, for instance, may be scientifically experimented in with the object of enabling us to read people more fully and exactly. Similarly, astrology may be employed for this purpose. It is usually the case that none of these attempts yields more or better results than plain common sense, and often they are wilder than the wildest guesses of the least experienced ordinary observer. Too often, further, they try to read the future and to anticipate, as it were, the chapters of a human book which are not yet actually written. The grain of sense in it all, however, is the attempt to employ new methods of reading people, and from this point of view these so-called sciences, which are not yet sciences, have a shadow of excuse for living. From these pseudo-sciences, with their aim of reading men more exactly, we can pass on to even more doubtful and deceiving means, such as clairvoyance, thought reading, and the like. In common with the pseudo-sciences and ordinary experience, these so-called occult sciences aim at enabling us to read people more completely and more exactly. But even more than the pseudo-sciences, they are filled with imagination and nonsense, so that the little real science they contain is diluted beyond recognition. Is there any direction of research that promises better results and is not open to objections that lie against the pseudo and the occult methods? A method, moreover, which, unlike psychoanalysis, for instance, demands no special previous training, but can be employed by anybody with common sense. There decidedly is, but the strange thing is that it is as well known as it is little practised. Though it contains, as it were, the key to all languages, and would eventually enable us to read people's hearts as well as their moods and thoughts, it is still regarded as something of an amusing toy, interesting at best in a detective story. The Greeks knew of electricity, but they failed to develop it. We have the key to human nature, but we fail to use and develop it seriously. In a word, it is Sherlock Holmes, but Sherlock Holmes and his creator are infants spelling out words in contrast with the adepts we might become by taking their method seriously and pursuing it as diligently as we should the study of Sanskrit or Chinese if these languages were necessary to us. Even as the method is practised in kindergarten, it yields results. There is no doubt whatever that a man accustomed to read people as studiously as a Sherlock Holmes knows them sooner and better than the rest of his fellows. Many words and phrases of the human text which ordinarily are never read or only after years of experience can be spelled out very quickly by an observer self-trained in the infant school of Sherlock Holmes. To produce more and better results, not only must the method be developed and much more energy put into it, but the language to be deciphered must, at least, be catalogued. After all, man is not infinite in his modes of self-expression. Our languages are limited in number, and they can be easily catalogued and classified. What are they? Imagine yourself in the presence of a complete stranger. He or she, we assume, is an open book, capable of being read at sight. We do not profess to be clairvoyants or thought readers. We cannot employ psychoanalysis, and we have neither the inclination nor the smattering of knowledge necessary for palmistry or phrenology. What can we see with our unaided sight and mind? What can we gather by simple observation without experiment and without rudeness? To enumerate, we can observe the following categories of manifestation. physical appearance, posture, gesture, facial expression, tone of voice, character of speech, manner and conduct, the movement and variety of all the foregoing. And from each of these classes of observation we can arrive at conclusions, tentatively at first, but amounting to practical certainty with continued trial and error. The method demands, of course, that the observer shall be all there and ready with his categories to pass rapidly from one to the other. But not only is it a safe method open to everybody, but its employment yields double results. It is effective in its immediate aim of enabling us to read people more and more fully and certainly, and at the same time, it compels the observer to develop more and more his powers of observation, deduction, and reasoning. In the end, he attains to the highest human faculty, intuition with certainty. How not to give oneself away. On many occasions we have involuntarily revealed what we wished to conceal. There are many situations in which the control of expression is essential to success, many in which it is essential to the happiness of others and oneself. Who cannot control his or her expressions, including not merely facial expression, but gestures, movements, postures, carriage, tone of voice, and so on, is really a child. We do not expect a child to control itself. Its virtue is in being uncontrolled. But when we become adult, we put away childish things. The first thing to realize is that we are all and upon all occasions transparent to any trained observer. We live in a glass house comparable to the observation hive which enables beekeepers to watch bees at work. The hive in which we live is our physical body, and since we exercise in general no real control over it, all its movements, postures, and gestures are the natural manifestations of our inward psychic states. For instance, I wake up in the morning and hear a depressing piece of news. My body at once manifests my depression. Lines appear in my face, my mouth droops at the corners, my gestures lose animation, and my carriage its spring. Anybody familiar with me recognizes at once that something is wrong, and a trained observer who had never seen me before would be equally perceptive. But this is only an exemplary case of our self-manifestation. All our states show themselves, from the most general to the most minute, in physical changes visible or perceptible to an outside observer. But for the fact that there is usually no such trained observer present, we should be giving ourselves away continuously, never doing anything else indeed. Assuming that we wish to be able to conceal ourselves and not to continue to live transparently to the world, the first thing to do is to become the observer ourselves. Very few people are aware how they look when in this, that, or the other mood, or exactly how they betray their subjective states by their postures, gestures, tones, and carriage. As a condition of controlling these expressions, it is plainly necessary to know what they are. And thus the first step towards not giving ourselves away is the discovery and realization of the particular ways in which we now do. Let us learn first to see and hear ourselves as others see us, and afterwards it may be possible to learn how not to be seen. But we cannot even begin to learn how not to betray ourselves until we know what our present habitual telltale modes of expression are. How was this to be done? By setting ourselves systematically to the job in a spirit of experimental curiosity. You have been told that you give yourself away, and you wish to find out how you do so. Make a point of observing yourself, and especially at such moments when you are disposed to be off guard. For instance, you feel annoyed. Then look in a mirror and see how your face expresses annoyance. Speak and listen to the tone of your voice. Walk and observe your carriage and deportment. Or you feel very elated about something. Just observe how, quite involuntarily, all your expressions and movements join in the applause. Each of us has a limited repertoire of expressions for all the states we experience, and it is our first task to become familiar with our repertoire. Only when we have observed ourselves in all states shall we be aware of our habitual modes of expression. The next step is to practice expressions in the absence of any feelings to be expressed. This, of course, is a normal process in the training of an actor, but we design it for a superior aim. In front of a mirror, preferably a pier glass, practice, in perfectly cold blood as it were, the expressions you imagine suited to this, that, or the other emotion or mood. Think, for instance, that you have just received news of a fortune, then try to express your state of mind in appropriate movements. Or try to compose your features so that they express wonder, indignation, suspicion, affection, or even nothing at all. This running over the scales of our instrument of expression is very useful in many ways, but above all we realize from it the practical separability of our expressions and our inner feelings. For obviously, if we can learn to express without feeling, we can learn to feel without expressing, which is the most important element in the art of not giving ourselves away. There are two further steps in the complete course, and the first is not to express the emotional mood you are feeling. You feel sad or worried, indignant or jealous or suspicious. Exactly at the moment when you are experiencing one of these emotions and are involuntarily about to betray it, resist the impulse. Don't let your muscles suit their action to your mood. Make them at least keep still. If this effort of non-expression is made at the moment when our body is most eager to shout our secrets on the housetops, the results will be found to justify themselves. We shall not need to be assured that we are attaining a degree of mastery over our telltale body. We shall feel and know it. A man who can deny his muscles their habitual luxury of automatically acting his moods and emotions is on the road to the greatest powers. The last step should be easy if the previous steps have been really taken, that is, not taken in imagination only. It consists in expressing the opposite, or at least the difference from what you are feeling at the moment. The penultimate step, as we have seen, was the non-expression of a current emotion. The present and final step is the positive expression, but of a different or opposite emotion from that immediately experienced. This, too, can be practiced in the mirror preparatorily to being tried in life. You feel out of sorts, wretched and on edge. Everybody and everything are rather hateful. You wonder why you were born. You feel fed up with life. Stand in front of your mirror and deliberately make your body express the opposite of these melancholy trains of mixed thoughts and feelings and sensations. Make yourself appear radiant, affectionate, and full of joie de vivre. Simulate the physical expression of emotions you do not feel. Pretend by your postures, gestures, facial expressions, and deportment that you feel anything but as you do. And stimulate so cleverly that your manner would, as we say, deceive the devil himself, in short, your own dark mood. It is naturally more difficult to do this in life. Before people, in the midst of distracting circumstances, it is like employing jiu-jitsu tricks outside the gymnasium and in real circumstances. Nevertheless, life must be our aim, and real circumstances our proof of proficiency. How to learn to observe. Science is organized knowledge and scientific observation. We assume all too readily that observation comes by nature, that we are born naturally observant. But the truth is that most of us are born lazy, and observation beyond the necessities of life has been too great a voluntary exertion. The result is that we live in a world of which we know a little more than a dog or a cat. We are familiar with a few things from long association. We have a nodding acquaintance with a number of things, but as far as our scientific observation of them goes, we can scarcely be said to be even curious. Exactly as in a dream, we take the most astonishing things in life for granted. Surrounded by hosts of mysterious objects, we hardly observe their outer shells. Few of us could clearly recall, indeed more than 1 in 100 of the common marvels we daily see. What increases our vital inertia is the habit, remaining over from childhood and seldom outgrown even by the oldest adults, of immediately classifying all objects and people as things we like and things we do not like. It is clear that there is no science at this, at least in the objective sense. Such a classification may serve as a symptom of our own state of being, but it does not even begin to classify and organize our knowledge of the world. Real observation only begins when likes and dislikes cease to be regarded as criteria of values, and all real science is beyond the childish attitude of "I like" and "I don't like." Even scientific observation, however, is very defective in its methods. Distrusting, for good reason, the intermixture of fancy with observation, science has made the profound error of dispensing with imagination, with the result that trained scientific observers are, as a rule, the last people in the world to see things as they are and to see them whole. Aspects of things, the continuity and development of single qualities, they see with considerable precision. They can weigh and measure and analyze and reckon time and space movements. But the things they thus observe not only die in their hands, as it were, but they are seen piecemeal and seldom as wholes, and still more rarely as phases of a process without beginning and without end. Take, for instance, an object such as one of the paving stones of our street walks. A moment's reflection will show us that it is full of curious interest. It is of stone quarried from some particular geological formation and brought to the city from near or far. It is shaped in a certain manner, implying the use of certain tools. It is of a certain size, and it is laid alongside of others in a certain pattern. In short, given a single paving stone in its actual situation, a competent thinker should be able to deduce almost its native civilization from it. But the process, rare as it is still reason and not observation, as it might be. Observations are truly made of it, and reason subsequently classifies and organizes them for the purpose of drawing conclusions from them. But what we mean by imaginative observation is not such a series of painfully coordinated facts after the various lines of observation have been pursued, but a simultaneous perception, in the flash of an eye, of all there is to know of the object in question. It is a paving stone we are observing. We should have in mind immediately and simultaneously its nature, its origin, its history, its use, its place in nature, its future. Naturally, all these perceptions could not be simultaneously articulated, but the understanding should simultaneously grasp them all. A book and a month might be necessary for the writing down of all our immediate perceptions, but the important fact is not the successive articulation, but the simultaneous realization. It should be the same with all the objects we encounter. We are not animals to be uncurious about the world we live in, but it is our function, and hence the sure source of our real delight as humans, to be more and more fully conscious of the nature, attributes, history, and use of everything around us. Conceive what life would mean for us if every object from the smallest to the greatest presented itself immediately to our minds in all its attributes and relations. That would indeed be living a waking life in this world. Such a mode of instantaneous perception does not come, however, by nature, nor even, as we have seen, by the ordinary training of sciences. It requires to be specially cultivated by deliberate effort continued over a long period. Certainly the reward is very great, and the effort must be corresponding. It is desirable, to begin with, to have a few categories or questions into which to pour one's observations. Let us choose the following. origin, history, relations, use, and future. Deliberately apply these categories or questions to any object at hand and report to yourself the answers you can give. Having done this, then try to realize them as a whole. Look at the object again and try to hold in the mind and to be aware simultaneously of all you know of it. This is an effort of real imagination, neither reason nor fancy. At first, not only will you discover, to your surprise, both how much you know and how much you do not know, but the difference in feeling between observing, thinking, remembering, reasoning, imagination, and fancy. These processes are, as a rule, merely names to us. We distinguish them theoretically and in our heads only. They mean as little to us as signs in algebra. But after a very few exercises of such observations as has just been described, these mental functions become certainly and specifically known as different. There is no need to look about for strange objects. In fact, the more familiar they are, the better. We use a legion of things, for instance, in our daily domestic life. From waking to sleeping, we tax the resources of the earth to provide us with necessities, utilities, and luxuries. Every one of these objects has a natural history, being ultimately composed of natural substance, a sociological history, having become what it is after many centuries of human development, and a particular history, its manufacture and delivery to ourselves. Try to assemble all you know of these histories of every object into a flash of realization. The resultant experience, when you have succeeded, will amply repay you.